And you can sit and try one thing a day, or you can try 50 things, and the 50 failures could lead to insights and learnings of how to actually get this right. Whereas, one or two attempts would obviously, not teach you anything. The beautiful thing about failure is you don't actually know what you're learning, but you're learning. But through iterations, succeed or fail, we learn naturally. And I think that's why we underestimate the value of attempts or even failures, because we're not aware consciously of what we actually learned always. It's very hard for us to pinpoint, but our objective is to succeed. And if we want to succeed, we'll naturally drop off all the things that didn't work and just focus on the things that work naturally. But to define what it is that didn't work is sometimes a bit tricky. And that's why we don't value, I think that's why we don't value failure or repetition as much as we should.
Welcome to Risk and Rise, the podcast where we explore the journey of overcoming the fear of failure, embracing risk, and achieving success in entrepreneurship, creativity, and personal growth. I'm your host, Talana Simpson, and I'm thrilled to embark on this journey with you. Together we'll discover the strategies, insights, and shifts in our thinking and attitudes that are needed to turn setbacks into stepping stones and transform fear into fuel for success. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's episode of Risk and Rise. Renier Kriel is an entrepreneur and mentor to entrepreneurs. He started his first business at the age of 24, a digital agency that built some of South Africa's first mobile apps. After selling his company in 2017, he spent a lot of time working with and supporting startups and entrepreneurs. And today he is going to be telling us about a resource for startups that he has also started called the Open Letter, as well as his podcast, How Would You Build It? Enjoy this episode with Renier Kriel. No way. So welcome, Renier. What comes to mind when you hear the term risk and rise?
Yeah, risk and rise. I think the only way to rise is if you're happy to take on some risk. And in my various entrepreneurial endeavors, as well as helping a lot of other founders in their journeys, that's definitely something that is very prominent front and center. Like without risk, it's really hard to rise.
So tell us a bit more about that journey that you've had with entrepreneurs, with your own entrepreneurial journey, I should say, and then more recently with others, and how you maybe initially confronted some of those fears in your journey of starting up and.
Yeah, I was quite fortunate. So I started a business in my 20s, and when you are 20, then you're extremely naive, right? So you think, well, what's the worst that can happen? Like, how hard can it be? And it's lovely. I love the naivety of young people, and particularly today, now that I'm older, working with young people, that naivety gets them to try things which older people that are, battle scarred and have tried almost everything don't want to attempt, and then sometimes they get something right. So I was in a similar position, starting a business in my 20s, and you very soon confronted after starting a business with how hard it is to get customers and to make them happy. Like that combination is a set of skills that's not natural to most people, and it's something that you need to develop. And I think, the first encounter with failure was like literally the very first pitch. It's like people are like, what are you talking about? Why do I need this? I don't see any value in this. And then after a few of those iterations, you're really confronted with either you stop doing this and you go tell all, the people in your world that you've excitedly told about this thing that you're starting, that you're out of this, or you need to confront the fact that I need to learn something from my failure and adjust and try again. And it never is easy, or it's never become easier. It just becomes something that you realize is part of the process, and it's part of what needs to happen in order to make progress.
Yeah, because I think that was one of your first business was making apps. Is that right?
Yeah, so we
didn't really know what apps were.
Yeah, so we had actually we started a software company that built any kind of software, and it's really hard to sell any kind of software. And then someone asked us if we wanted to give a shot at building a mobile app for them, which we did, and it ended up being one of the first iPhone apps in South Africa. And then after that, it was a bit easier. Like, everybody had wanted an app. There weren't a lot of options out there. We were like 3 or 4 companies in South Africa who did it. So we ended up speaking to some of the biggest brands and being able to build for some of the biggest brands. Partly because we were one of the only options they had. But also, I think we built a really good team, and we were really good at building apps at the time. And yeah, that business grew quite rapidly because of just the rise of popularity in apps. But then, if speaking about failures, one of the things we didn't foresee is the fact that, there was a new technology at the time. It was, React Native became quite popular. And React Native is, in simple terms, just a way to write code that can actually be deployed to both an iPhone and an Android phone and run equally well on both of those devices. Where up until that point, you had to build a specific app for an iPhone and a specific app for an Android phone, and that's what we did. And we didn't adapt quickly enough to be able to build on that new technology, because you could literally half the cost of development, which was something that a lot of people were looking for at the time. So we couldn't adapt fast enough, and it was a big lesson learned. And I think one of the key things for me in business is, if you know why your business is working and you're making money, then you're in a good spot. If you don't know why your business is working and you're not making money, then you're also in a good spot, because you should change things in order to make money. But if you're doing well and you don't know exactly why you're doing well, then you expose yourself to, massive changes in industry, and some outside risks out of your control, which could then very quickly, take a hold of the business and put you in a very difficult spot. So that's definitely a lesson I learned through that, not being ready for that change, or not actually adapting for that change fast enough.
So if you learned then that you need to adapt faster, what do you do nowadays then that helps you to be more adaptable? Because is it the mindset part of shifting, or is it
So
just
I think
a
with
laziness in skills?
and I think the benefit of getting older is you realize that you can make progress in life without knowing everything. Whereas you're young, you think you know everything, and then you launch yourself in that position. So I think the approach I take now is that, I don't know everything. In fact, I think I know very little of what there is to be known about business and all the other things. And that just changes your posture, right? So if you think you've got a lot to learn, you're always learning. But if you think you know a lot, then you're not learning. Then you're trying to tell other people what you know. So having a posture of not knowing is really a healthy one, because it keeps you curious and it keeps you open to things that could rapidly change. And having that posture means, as you learn new things, you naturally adapt to that which is coming your way. So, I think going forward, if something like that would happen, I think we'll be better prepared, because I do think I'm more teachable now and more open to things changing, and open to things, learning new things all the time.
So then what about the risk part? Because I mean, there are a few people I've spoken to that have, done amazing things in their businesses. A lot of them started when they were young and naive, as you mentioned. That in a way, that's an advantage for being able to take the risk of starting. So what about now? How do you see risk, and in terms of starting something new, with more hindsight, more experience?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you're younger, you have a lot less to lose, right? You typically don't have a family and other responsibilities. So, you can dive in, and literally, I thought about it like, I was fortunate enough to have a degree behind my name. So if this didn't work out, maybe I could just get a job as an engineer. And that was always the backup plan. And that also gave me a bit of confidence to give it a proper shot and see what happens, right? Because it's like, what's the worst that can happen? It will fail, and I can just go back to being an engineer. But as you get older, obviously, the worst that can happen is, well, your kids need to go out of school, and the family doesn't have food to eat. So that changes the the game substantially. But the benefit also of being older is the fact that you now have more wisdom and understanding and experience, right? And a bigger network. I think the network counts for a lot. So I started a newsletter, what is it, almost 18, bit more than 18 months ago, which originally it is a newsletter and still a newsletter to this day, called The Open Letter. And we write about startups and tech and business in South Africa. Um, but the idea is to build a media company in this space, and we've got a lot of things and big plans, which we always had from day one. But if we wanted to launch those things for day one, the risk and the cost to do that would have been substantial. So instead of launching everything from day one, we slowly exposed ourselves to more risk as time went on. So initially, the risk was we'll spend a few hours a week to do something. Then it became a bit more hours. Eventually, we started committing a bit of money to it. Eventually, we started committing more money to it. And eventually, we're putting ourselves a bit more out there. So it's really like slowly putting it out there and managing the risk in a way that it is manageable. And the primary risk really is like we often don't understand how people would respond to a business unless we put an offer in front of them and say they have to pay for it, or they have to spend time doing something, or they have to. Up until that point, like I mean, the the business has a substantial amount of risk. So doing it iteratively, learning from feedback, and playing the long game really is what I'm doing now. Where we're saying, cool, this is not gonna be successful or massive or money generating, maybe even within 2 years, but maybe 3 years, a bit longer. But we're doing it with a long-term vision that in time there'll be enough momentum, and we're slowly exposing ourselves to more risk as we go on this journey, and as we think that the risk is justified.
Oh, that's interesting. So almost like building the foundation and then just keeping to, adding on and on as you go. So what else around failure then, if we go back to that, because I think I don't know if you've mentioned enough then about what you do nowadays. So you started your own business, you sold it, and then you got to a place where now you're actually helping other entrepreneurs. So what do you notice then around this fear of failure, having, been exposed to so many people that are building businesses?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the fear of failure is a very interesting thing, because a large part of it, I believe, is social, right? So we feel like, what are people going to think if this thing doesn't work out? And the big problem with that is that it's actually a fake fear, because people don't think too much when things don't work out. It's maybe a story in a WhatsApp group or around town, but they quickly move on to something else. So it's not such a big deal, actually. And we've often heard about how people in America celebrate failure and how they don't do it here. And I think there's the social construct that there's so much expectation that you need to make it work, that it's really the fear of failure really is a social thing. And it's really obviously keeping a lot of people back, because at the end of the day, it's impossible to get it right. And in my experience, building a business definitely never works out the way you expect it to. So trying to do it in a perfect way is just not possible. So working with local founders, I think there's this big fear that their product and their service isn't perfect, because underneath the hood, a lot of them realize it's still flawed, it still has some issues, and it's still not perfect. And if you think about it, like even well-established companies aren't perfect. Like, I mean, the Google products we use, sometimes there's a bug. I mean, the other day, I bank with one of the big banks. The other day, there was an issue of the banking. And so, I mean, if they never launched because they had a fear of it not being perfect, like they never would have been the bank that I use. So, so I think it's that thing of saying, let me not worry about what the product is right now, because it isn't perfect, but rather let me commit to the process of ensuring that I care about my customers, right? And taking on that mindset, I've seen a lot of founders actually move over to action. So instead of going, my product's perfect, you should have it, they go, look, this product can solve a specific, or the service can solve a specific problem of yours. and I personally commit to make sure that it gets done properly, right? Which then gives founders a lot of leverage. They can go, well, I can brush over all the mistakes or imperfections or flaws of my product or service simply because I'm committed to my customers and making sure that they get value from what we're doing. And that goes a long way. If you do that in the early stages and for your customers, they really appreciate that personal touch and the willingness, and then they forgive flaws. They get upset, but an upset customer is actually not a bad customer, and I think that's a very important thing to know as well. An upset customer is very willing to give you feedback, right? And sometimes a dormant customer that pays and doesn't really tell you anything is not nearly as useful as an upset customer that tells you what's wrong with the product or service. So, and once again, we can be fearful of an upset customer. We shouldn't. We should actually go, upset customer is a great place to get feedback. But then, what we try and do, the various things that I'm involved in is the number one challenge as a business is how do you turn an upset customer into a champion? Because if you're able to do that, they're going to be really vocal about how awesome you are. I mean, just think about personal experiences. Like for me personally, I had an issue with an Airbnb, but they went, out of their way to make the experience great and, added the extra night for free. And now I tell everybody you should go to that place or you should use this platform because they've really turned that perception around and made me feel special. So yeah, there's a lot of different fears that play in imperfect products, upset customers, and then the last thing that I love doing with founders is taking a stoic approach, right? So I was sitting with a founder once, and they had a product which wasn't live yet, and they said, no, the product's not ready. And I said, okay, well, what will happen if you launch a product tomorrow? And they said, well, or what's the worst thing that can happen? I said, no, the thing might not work. I'm like, okay, well, what happens then? They go, well, we'll be in the store where we run it so we can help them. Like, okay, and then what's the worst that can happen then? No, the restaurant owner can be really upset. Okay, and if he's really upset, what's going to happen then? No, he will never want to talk to us again. Okay, and what's going to happen then? No, I guess we'll just find another restaurant to sell it to. I'm like, okay, so it's not so bad, right? So you're not going to die. So just go for it. Like, try it. And I actually use that exercise myself. Like sometimes when I go, oh, I really don't know how to do this, or I'm scared it's not going to work out, I literally play it out. Like, what's the worst that can happen? And when you realize you're not going to die when you do things, and that the consequences might not be enjoyable, but it's not the end of the world, then it's easier to move over into action to go, okay, cool, let's get going.
Yes, a lot of the examples you share then is also about then us as founders or entrepreneurs being comfortable with uncomfortableness. Being okay with the uncomfortableness of having an upset customer, because as you said, you can mine that. The information you get is so useful in order to improve your service and your product. And being uncomfortable with losing a sale, it's okay because it will help you to be better for the next sale. Especially, I think, if you translate whatever that experience was, you actually look for the feedback and translate it into learning and apply something different going forward.
Yeah, exactly. And specifically when it comes to sales, like sales is really one of the biggest challenges for founders, right? Like I think people grossly underestimate how complicated and expensive sales is in South Africa. And not in South Africa, South African founders typically underestimate it. And you can sit and try one thing a day, or you can try 50 things, and the 50 failures could lead to insights and learnings of how to actually get this right. Whereas, one or two attempts would obviously, not teach you anything. So, but it's so uncomfortable to try and attempt to do 50 sales, right? It's one of the most uncomfortable things, but it's a necessary evil, or not even evil. It's a necessary step in the process to learn how to do it well. And the beautiful thing is the more you do it, obviously it's a numbers game, right? So if you do 100 outreaches and you converted 1%, right? So you get one meeting, okay? You haven't closed one, but through the 100 iterations, through that 100 reps that you've done, you've now learned, 99 ways that probably doesn't work as well, okay? So the next time you do it, it will be less painful because you're more comfortable doing it. But chances are you're going to get a 5% conversion. So eventually you're going to end up doing 20 calls and getting 15 meetings. And that's really, but there's no other way to get through that process to get really good at it than doing it 100 times, or doing it 200 times, or keep on doing it 100 times. And that's really the failure. The beautiful thing about failure is you don't actually know what you're learning, but you're learning. I mean, a lot of times people go, "Oh, you need to reflect on failure," and I do think there's a place for that. But through iterations, succeed or fail, we learn naturally. And the beautiful thing about that is it's really hard to tell someone what you've learned, but next time that you try, you'll avoid certain things naturally without actually being aware what it is that you're avoiding, right? So if someone were to ask me, write a book about everything you've learned, it would be really hard to do that. But naturally in the work that I do, I'll direct people in specific ways and not others based on past failures and past experience and past repetitions of certain things. And I think that's why we underestimate the value of attempts or even failures, because we're not aware consciously of what we actually learned always. It's very hard for us to pinpoint. But in a sales meeting, it could be someone's body language, it could be some words we use, and those things we naturally adapt the next time we do it without actually realizing we did it differently. Why? Because our objective is to succeed, and if we want to succeed, we'll naturally drop off all the things that didn't work and just focus on the things that work naturally. But to define what it is that didn't work is sometimes a bit tricky, and that's why we don't value. I think that's why we don't value failure or repetition as much as we should.
That repetition part is so key, because the only way to develop confidence is to do. And as you say, the more you do, especially the faster you do the iterations, the faster you're going to get to developing that skill or that ability. Yeah. So what about bouncing back then? What has been your experience when so besides the small little iterations of learning, that you get from doing the 50 sales calls, as you said, failing 50 times, because that's how in one day versus failing 3 times, you're going to learn much faster with the 50 times. But when you've really been knocked down, like something has really now not worked, how do you get back up again? What's been your experience?
I don't think there's an easy answer to this, because this is probably the one thing that makes building a business and being an entrepreneur so difficult, is the emotional roller coaster of this is the greatest thing in the world, or this is the worst thing in the world, and I can't believe I have to be here. I think what has helped me significantly is a long-term vision of saying, my objective isn't to get it right now. My objective is to figure it out over time. And that view is really saying, well, we don't have to win every battle, but we're fighting a war. We're working towards a specific goal in a specific time. Now, I've been involved in businesses or tried to build things where that wasn't clear, where the actual 5-year mission wasn't clear, and it was way harder to do, to bounce back, because you're almost not aiming towards something. Whereas if there's a very specific goal that you're working towards, which could be a profitability target, it could be a sell the business by day X, it could be, whatever. But that medium 5-term plan or objective to work towards, and the knowing that you don't have to get everything right, you just have to move closer towards that objective, just makes it a bit easier to get back into it. But personally, practically, sometimes a bit of distance from the whole thing helps. So I find traveling really helps with that, to change perspective, to broaden horizons. If you can afford to do business trips abroad, and or just change of scenery or landscape, just even if you live in Cape Town, do a trip to Joburg or see a few customers. On the plane, driving there, you see different things, you experience different things, you eat at different places you normally don't, you meet different people. All of that just stimulates, for me, it stimulates ideas, and helps you get new energy again. So sometimes, you can get stuck in a specific way doing things, and then after a few setbacks and a few failures, you feel like this thing isn't going to work. But that change of scenery and change of environment just helps to get perspective. And coupling that with that long-term or medium-term vision, really, really helps to go, okay, cool, let's try something else, let's do something different. And I think something that's very important, like recently I had the chat with someone that's building a business, and they said, they want to launch a new product. and they're not sure if the product's going to work, right? So kind of been putting off launching the product because not sure if it's going to work. And we did that stoic thing, like what's the worst that can happen? And the worst that could happen is there's no reason for this product to exist. And a good outcome when we get there is the fact that, well, at least we won't have sleepless nights thinking about how we're going to launch this product anymore. We can just, have peace in knowing that this isn't going to work. So, and thinking about it that way, it's like, okay, well, then we might as well launch the thing and see if it works. So, it's funny how there can be benefit in failure, which is like, not the obvious benefit. The non-obvious benefit in this example was the fact that, now we don't have to waste time thinking about this anymore, and we can focus on other things that can generate income. So, that sometimes, that fear of failure that's prohibiting us from starting is actually robbing our energy to actually focus on things that are already working. So might as well get it going, realize it's not working, cancel it, and get onto the stuff that is working.
Interesting, right? A lot of what you said I'm picking up then is also I talk about the thinking style of black or white, or all or nothing, versus the gray, the bits in between, which allows us to see things more as a journey. So the black and white means it has to be perfect, and we have to know for sure it's going to succeed before we do anything, versus what you're saying is having a much longer term perspective and understanding it's a journey towards a goal of perfection. And I don't like the term perfect, because I don't think it exists, but it's more a journey towards our goal of whatever that might be. That is far more useful to get us to take the actions that will help us to test an idea, so that we can move on, as you say. And the other thing I think you said about not South Africa, but or a bit about the South Africa in particular, but about failure was the social aspect. So we're not only scared that how we will experience it, but also what other people will say about it. Do you find in South Africa that there's this like you were saying, actually, that the truth is people just move on very fast when someone might fail? But I often wonder if maybe there's more, maybe you ask the question this way, there's more that we could do as a society in terms of our approach to someone failing that would actually encourage them to take more chances, because we don't make it a big thing when someone fails. I always try and actually celebrate someone that has bothered to try something, even if it did fail, just because we need more people starting or attempting.
Yeah. So I think South Africa, I mean, we all know we've got a very complicated background, but I think something that is not often spoken about is if we look at the two extremes, right? So we look at, white privileged South Africans pre-94, and we look at black South Africans that come typically from underprivileged backgrounds. There's two different constructs on these two groups of people that both of them have almost a similar effect, right? So I mean, I can obviously speak from a white person background. There's almost like this this thing that comes from our upbringing, that so you go into corporate, and then you buy a Toyota or a Volkswagen or a BMW or a Mercedes if you've made it. You bank at this bank. You go to that church, and it's like all of this is like, it was almost conditioned that this is how you should live and be, right? So everybody that attempted entrepreneurship almost stepped out of that mold, and there was a sense of, oh wow, I can't believe you're doing that, right? And that created a lot of social pressure in terms of, why don't you just get a corporate job? So I got that. My parents asked me, why don't you just go get a nice job at this engineering place, because it's a safe thing to do. You'll get a nice pension. Like, what are you doing, right? So you're already up against this kind of why are you stepping out of the mold here, right? And I mean, we don't have to go into details, but there was very sound reason for the previous government to make the people think and act in that way, because they were programmed to almost not object to the system that have been put in place, right? Now I can imagine, I mean, I didn't grow up like that, but having conversations with a lot of my friends that grew up, in disadvantaged communities, black friends, there's almost this other pressure that, you need to send money back home. So why don't you take a corporate job so you can get a nice salary and send some money back? Like, don't go and do this entrepreneurial thing. It's not going to work. And it's almost, those two pressures come from completely different places, but it ends up doing the same thing. It encourages people not to take risks and go out and do something, right? And it's quite unique because it's something we have in common, even if we come from different backgrounds, is the fact that, there's almost this pressure of saying, just go get a job in corporate and don't take a risk in entrepreneurship. And to your question of, what should we do to support people? I think there's a global notion. It's not uniquely South African, but there's this global notion that wants to bring forth equality at the expense of rewarding people that are attempting things, right? So I'm all for equality. Like, I'm not opposed to that, and I mean, this is obviously not a political conversation, but what can easily happen is people can say, no, everything needs to be equal, right? But in that process of making everything equal, they actually discount some people that are trying hard and failing and iterating and really trying to build something, right? So they're getting disincentivized through taxation. They get disincentivized through legislation. They get disincentivized through, all kinds of different things to actually just go out and try under things. So, if I look at the environment in South Africa, if you put forward in front of a person to take on the amount of risk and the emotional roller coaster of building a business, and then add on top of it, things that a tax system that's not overly friendly towards building a business and being successful, and you add some of the other stuff that we're all very well aware of that goes on in South Africa, and all of this, and even globally, like, it's not unique to South Africa, as I say, all of a sudden, it doesn't look that attractive to try. It's like, I'm going to fail hundreds of times to get there. Like, so I think, politicians will do whatever they want, and we can't rely on them to do anything that would make, the country move forward, although we would like that. But personally, as a society, what can we do? I think we can encourage people for trying. We can encourage people that are trying, even if they're not making it. Even with my children, like, I try to focus not on the outcome, but rather the process. Like, if they play the sport game well, I won't encourage, them playing the sport game well. I'll comment on the extra effort they put in training during the week leading up to that point. Because that's really what made the difference, right? The outcome is actually just a measurement of how well you perform in comparison of other people and the effort that they put in. So it's not an absolute anyway, it's relative. So, and it's the same in business, right? A lot of times South African businesses can do well in a South African context, but it's also just relative to whatever is happening in the market. So, if the effort, is and the attempts and the willingness to take risk and fail is high, then obviously that's something we should encourage and applaud, and we should go, wow, look at that. You really you really put in the effort to give this business a good shot at working. And the funny thing is, often when we do, then either we learn a substantial amount through the journey, which helps us in whatever we do next, if the entire thing fails, or it ends up working. And I think as a
True.
society, we have a responsibility to just encourage the effort and yeah, focus on efforts, not outcomes.
Yeah, and then that focus on effort is a big part of the growth mindset. I don't know if you've heard of that, but that's how we develop that focus to grow and develop instead of just getting it right first time, is focusing on the effort and the strategy and the persistence, which all help us. Great, because we really do need more people trying and attempting and hopefully creating jobs and stimulating our economy and all that, and solving the problems, because I think that's a big part of startups, right? So how do we just start a startup? How do we, get going with that? Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, one of the most underrated things is the fact that, I think people should start business from a perspective of understanding what they want in life and what they like doing. And that in itself is a really hard question for people to answer. But if you do it from that perspective, you go, cool, what do I want to do? Okay, like, I want to be spending my time doing X, Y, and Z. Okay. And I've had many business ideas in my life, and I've started some of them, and some of them have quickly died. And I asked myself the question, well, why did they die quickly? And if you look at a very specific business, before you start it, I think it's important to say, okay, let's think about all the different activities that will be involved to make this business work, right? So let's say you're building a app, right? Cool. We're going to have to build an app, or we're going to have to manage a team that's going to build the app. We have to get money to do that. We're going to have to get customers, which means we're going to have to speak to these kind of people. A lot of the times we're going to have to get feedback from them. We're going to have to convince them to pay. I'm going to have to manage a team. I'm going to manage staff. And then you list all these different things that you have to do, right? And then you think about the amount of time that you're probably going to be spending in each of these activities. If you don't like the majority of those activities that is involved in building it, if you don't see yourself enjoying solving those kind of problems, then you're probably not going to enjoy building that business. Now, whether or not this is a world-changing app idea, business idea, or whatever, that business will never be successful because it will drain the life out of you. So I think a very important aspect is once you get an idea or you see an opportunity to really unpack what are all the activities that you would have to do over the next 10 years within that business, and then figure out, would you enjoy solving those kind of problems? Let's say you build a B2B business, right? So you're going to have to deal with corporates all the time, and corporates come with, certain kind of ways in which they want to be dealt with. It might require a lot of networking. It might require a lot of after hours, taking them out to dinners, those kind of things. If you don't enjoy doing that, and this business's success depends on it, then it's probably not a good idea to start that kind of business. So I think, that's probably the first thing. The second thing is typically where we are subject matter experts, where we understand something of what we're trying to do really well, it becomes substantially easier for us to excel in that and really get the nuance of how it works, right? So if I were to start a business in education, I don't know nearly enough about education, like a edtech, to start a business like that, right? But if I were to do it, the kind of stuff I would fail in is basic things like this is not how people learn. You can't have technology in all the classrooms, like those kind of things, right? Whereas if a teacher were to do it, someone who's been a teacher for 20 years, and specifically someone that has quite an interest in tech, they would not start, the failure wouldn't start there. Their failures would start at a place of, much deeper, closer to an actual solution, which means they waste a substantial amount less money and effort and time and emotional strain to get to a point of actually something that's closer to solving a specific problem. So many times I think the biggest failures I've seen, or reasons startups fail, is one, the startup founder isn't sure what it, they're not comfortable with what they're signing up for, and then it just becomes a drag for them. And the second reason, doing something which is so far out of their domain of expertise that the amount that they fail without getting wins is just too much, and it becomes overbearing and just not enjoyable.
Thanks. I want to introduce now in Risk and Rise a new segment of the show, which is around startup resources. And I know you mentioned earlier a bit about your newsletter, but I do think it's a very good resource for anyone who is looking to start something, especially in the tech area and especially in South Africa and Africa. So maybe you can just explain a bit more about the open letter and also your podcast that you run, because I've been enjoying listening to that as well. And just how people can get more information about those as a resource for startups.
Yeah, good. Yeah, thanks. So we've got an email newsletter that goes out twice a week. It's called The Open Letter. You can check it out at theopenletter.io or theopenletter.co.za. And what it is really is we don't just write about startups, but we actually look for signals and trends and big opportunities in South African context specifically. And then we break that down in terms of numbers, size of market, opportunity, and how to actually address that market. And then we typically end off by showcasing some local companies that are busy building in that space and trying to solve those specific problems. And what we like about it, even in doing the research, is it actually broadens our horizons for so many different opportunities that there are. And the funny thing is we write about a opportunity per email, which is 2 opportunities per week. And we've never run out of ideas. Like there's literally so many markets and opportunities and things changing. And that's just the nature of it, right? The world's changing so fast with the introduction of technology and, just circumstances and climate and everything, that constantly there's new ways to do things that could result in opportunities for people to launch businesses. So we talk about trends, and then we also talk about we share tips on how to specifically build startups once a week, and then once a week we also have a podcast where we interview people and ask them stories of how they actually went about building their business, which is called How Would You Build It? And it's on YouTube and Spotify and Apple, but you can check it out. It's all on our website. So yeah, come join our community. We've got about 8,000 people reading the newsletter twice a week. And we actually do it in a very fun and conversational way. So a lot of people actually say if they don't join the content, they really have a good laugh. So and that's part of our strategy. But
Yes.
yeah, I think it's a good resource.
No, I've seen you've got some polls in it. You're asking, and it always cracks me up, some of the options in the polls that you do. Super. So can I ask you then some rapid fire questions as we start to wrap up?
Sure, let's go for it.
What comes to mind when I say risk?
Oh, discomfort, I guess.
What's your secret weapon to bouncing back from a setback?
Yeah, perspective, thinking about the long-term vision, going for a walk, changing environment, changing scenery, and then, yeah, trying a different angle.
Oh, you mentioned that earlier then. So what's the most important lesson that you have learned as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think it's kind of in line with what I mentioned earlier. Like be open to learn new things. So don't have a posture of thinking that you know everything, but rather do it the other way around and think that you know nothing. And that keeps you open to learning, and it keeps you open to new ideas and different angles of doing things.
Oh, it's so valuable. And what's the best advice you have ever received as an entrepreneur?
Oh, that's a difficult one. It's probably along the lines of going for reps. There was this thought, and I can't remember. It's in a very popular book, but I forgot the author's name. I think it's Jim Collins maybe that wrote about or Maxwell about 100 hours or 1,000 hours you become a specialist in, or 10,000 hours you become a specialist in a specific role. And I think, someone said, it's more 1,000 reps. Like if you've done something 1,000 times, then you become good at it. And I kind of agree with that notion. Like, it's more about the amount of reps than the hours spent in a specific task. And, we can speed up reps. You don't have to take 10,000 hours to become a specialist. You can do that very quickly through, just doing more reps.
And what inspires you to get out of bed in the morning?
I think, apart from personal things, I've got beautiful kids and a beautiful wife, and I love, seeing them and the progress they make and the journey that they're on. But I think, from a work perspective, this long-term mission is if you're working on something that's fun and you enjoy doing, and you've got a medium-term plan that you're working towards, it's like winning a battle, and it's really the strategic part of figuring out how to win that battle. It makes or the war. It makes the specific losses and battles less painful, and it helps you to keep perspective. So it's really that thing, and it kind of ties with I mentioned earlier the angle of saying my product or my service isn't perfect, but I'm committed to making it work. Like that putting yourself on the line and saying, cool, I'm gonna make it work. I'm gonna figure it out. That's quite an enjoyable part of the journey if you take that approach.
Yeah. I think a big part of being an entrepreneur is that interest in figuring things out, proving things. So as we end then, if there's anyone listening to this that really has that urge to do something entrepreneurial, but is just filled with fear to take that first step, what would be your tip for them?
Yeah, I think it's to break it down and really start simple, right? And I think the end goal of something you want to get to doesn't always have to start with that end goal in mind. So, if you look at Facebook as an app, as an example, it's quite a complicated app and they've added a lot of stuff, but it started very simple. And, chances are Zuckerberg had this big idea in mind eventually, but he didn't end up building that. He started with something extremely simple. And I think that's the way to do it. It's like, just look at the amount of risk that you are willing to take on, maybe a bit of money to spend. Maybe the best form is actually putting a bit of time into it. Like if it doesn't have to cost you something, but you have to put in a bit of time. Like just think about what is the first thing that you can attempt to build traction. And what I've found to be amazing is like if you just try something, even if that thing doesn't work, it often ends up opening up other opportunity. And the worst thing that could happen is you're probably going to learn something. So let's say someone's listening, they go, "Hey, I want to start a email newsletter." You might write 10 of them and then realize this is not going to work. But you, having gone through the process of writing 10 emails that you send out, it's actually a skill that can help you in other parts of your life and work and other things. So when things fail, the worst thing is you've actually learned something and you're better for it.
Yeah, thank you, Renier. This has been Risk and Rise, and I'm Talana Simpson. Let's now go and put what we've learned from Renier into practice and actually go and iterate, repeat and repeat and repeat. Practice something so that we do as many iterations as we can in a short period of time and actually develop that capacity of learning from each of those little failures, all those little mistakes, so that we can improve and together risk and rise. Thank you for joining me on Risk and Rise, where we face fears, conquer challenges, and rise above adversity to achieve our dreams. Find out more at riskandrise.co.za.